Ivan's rise to power. Ivan the Terrible was born into chaos in 1530, the only child of Grand Prince Vasily III and Princess Elena. By age 3, he was Grand Prince of Moscow, though his father still ruled in his place. But behind the gilded halls of the Kremlin, his early years were shaped by betrayal, hunger, and court intrigue. You see, Ivan's mother had died when he was only 13 months old, and while his father married again, he kept his distance from his young son, perhaps out of fear that his wife was poisoning the boy against him. Whatever the reason, Ivan was largely ignored, left to grow up with little love or guidance. The result was a resentful and isolated child, mocked by his counselors for his stutter and malformed nose. As he grew older, this humiliation turned to smoldering rage, a rage that would eventually consume him. When Ivan was 13, his father fell seriously ill. Perhaps the counselors thought they finally had a chance to mold the unruly teenager into something more presentable, but instead, they enraged him further. They pushed him to marry the daughter of one of their number, a match that would cement their influence over him. But Ivan refused. Then, in 1546, Vasily III did die, and at his funeral, young Ivan collapsed and fainted. It was the perfect opportunity for the counselors to take control, and so they did. They declared Ivan unfit to rule and installed his 13-year-old sister, Anna, as the new Grand Princess, ruling on her behalf. Only the church patriarch opposed this move, recognizing it as a disaster waiting to happen. But the boyars were having none of it. They sealed Ivan off from the public, keeping him in a tower with only his wife and a handful of servants for company. They even barred his own sister from seeing him, and so, in secret, Ivan seethed, plotting his revenge. Meanwhile, his sister's rule was disastrous. In 1552, she married the hated advisor who'd orchestrated her regency, but the wedding celebrations turned deadly. Fire swept the city and mobs attacked the homes of the boyars. Amidst the chaos, Ivan emerged from his tower, riding a white horse like a knight in shining armor, rescuing people from burning buildings and killing the rioters who stood in his way. With his popularity soaring, he confronted the council, demanding recognition as the rightful ruler. But when they refused, he rode to the cathedral and tore up his sister's royal insignia, declaring himself the sole legitimate heir of the dynasty. He then named himself not Grand Prince, but Tsar of All Rus, the first ruler to use that imperial title since the fall of the Roman Empire. And that wasn't just symbolism. Tsar meant Caesar. Ivan wasn't claiming to be a prince. He was declaring a divine right to rule, backed by the Orthodox Church and centuries of Byzantine tradition. And from that moment on, his enemies would learn to fear his new title, Ivan's reign of terror and Oprichnina. At first, his ascension brought stability to the realm. He ended the disastrous regency, restored order to the country, and crushed a Polish invasion of Lithuania. But Ivan's rule would soon descend into terror. That's because, despite his popularity, Ivan remained suspicious of the nobility, and so to keep them under control, he created a secret police force, a shadowy group of black-robed enforcers called the Oprichnina. At first, it dealt only with minor offenses like tailors ignoring fashion decrees, but quickly it evolved into an instrument of terror. The oprichina spied on nobles, extorted money from them, and tortured them for real or imagined crimes, often disappearing them without a trace. It was a chilling display of state power, and no one was safe. Princes and princesses, generals and clergy, ambassadors and commoners alike. Then, in 1564, Ivan unleashed the oppressors upon the nobility directly, executing 60 of them for real or alleged crimes. Suddenly, disloyalty meant death, and so the oprichina became Ivan's Praetorian Guard, hunting down any threat to his authority, real or imagined. In 1566, they invaded the home of the Lithuanian ambassador, murdered him, and blamed it on the Poles, seizing more power for themselves. In 1568, they constructed the fortress of the bloodthirsty Prince Komsky, sentencing anyone sent there to almost certain death. Soon the entire population of Russia lived in fear of the secret police. And all the while, Ivan watched with morbid fascination as his own court crumbled around him. In 1569, his wife accused several courtiers of conspiring against Ivan and the Tsarina. Once again, the oprichnina swooped in, interrogating, arresting, and murdering suspects. That same year, the royal family visited the recently conquered city of Kazan. But while touring the citadel, Ivan noticed that the ramparts weren't high enough. A couple of careless shots could bring down the whole structure. So he ordered it torn down and rebuilt, locking up thousands of townspeople in the process. Of course, this was hardly helpful to morale. And with the nobility living in fear of reprisals and the people angry over their confinement, The trip turned into a humiliating disaster. However, not everyone feared Ivan. The Cossacks of the Ukraine welcomed him as a liberator, a champion against the oppression of the Polish nobility. But those hopes were dashed when Ivan invaded and conquered the region, enslaving its inhabitants and executing those who resisted. Even the church suffered under his regime. When Metropolitan Philip was summoned to the capital for defying Ivan's wishes, he arrived only to find himself locked up in the tower where Ivan had spent his youth. After 9 days, he was dead, and so went the last 2 decades of Ivan's reign. The Oprichnina hunted down and murdered nobles, secured him absolute power, and allowed him to embark on a series of devastating wars. Wars, legacy, and personal downfall. In 1565, he started a 3-year campaign against the Crimean Khanate, taking the city of Kiev and brutally punishing its inhabitants. Then, in 1571, Poland declared war on Russia. The pretext was the murder of a Polish ambassador, but it was really a chance to capitalize on Ivan's unpopularity. And so began the Livonian War. But Ivan wasn't fighting on the fronts. England had opened a trade mission in 1553 and in 1564. An Anglo-Russian trade company was established, trading primarily in furs. And in 1583, an English traveler described Moscow as a city full of merchants and far richer than London. Yet the prosperity never reached the peasantry. And meanwhile, the war with Poland dragged on with little success. And so, desperate for a victory, Ivan attacked the Crimean Khanate once more. But his army was defeated, and he barely escaped with his life. Back in Moscow, his son, Fyodor, tried to calm his anger, but Ivan flew into a rage, striking his son so hard that Fyodor died 8 days later. And so the first Tsar lost his heir, and that spelled the beginning of the end for both him and the dynasty. In 1581, the nobles had had enough. They forced Ivan to divide his realm among his children, granting them autonomy. But as he stepped down, he unleashed one final spasm of violence, murdering dozens of nobles and princes. But he was too weak to stop the inevitable. In 1584, Ivan the Terrible died, leaving behind a power vacuum, a fractured dynasty, and the seeds of Russia's time of troubles. So let's get back to the question, was Ivan the Terrible a great monarch? Well, he was certainly a brilliant tactician and administrator, a visionary who modernized the military and expanded the borders of Russia. He was also ruthless and strategic, knowing when to use force and when to play the role of the benevolent monarch. But his paranoia and cruelty were legendary, crushing not only his enemies, but many of his friends and allies, and ultimately, his personal life unraveled. He killed his own son in a fit of rage. His empire was exhausted by endless wars, and his successors were weak and ineffective. In the end, Ivan's legacy was a mixed one, a brilliant ruler undone by his own demons. Thanks for watching.